Imagine a fortune so vast it dwarfed the entire U.S. Treasury. A concentration of wealth so immense that in today's money it would be worth over $200 billion. More than Gates, more than Musk, more than Bezos at their absolute peak. This wasn't the fleeting wealth of a tech bubble or the state-sponsored fortune of an oil sheik. It was the hard-earned steel and steam empire of a single American family, the Vanderbilts. They didn't just build mansions, they built palaces on Fifth Avenue that made European royalty blush. They didn't just own companies, they controlled the very arteries of a nation, commanding a sprawling network of railroads that was the lifeblood of American commerce. Their name was synonymous with power, industry, and a level of luxury so profound it remains legendary. When a Vanderbilt threw a party, the world stopped to watch. When a Vanderbilt built a house, it became an instant landmark, a monument to a dynasty that seemed eternal. And then it vanished. Like a ghost ship in the night, the greatest fortune in American history simply sailed away. Within the span of just 2 generations, the money was gone. The Gilded Age palaces were sold off for fractions of their cost, demolished to make way for department stores, or turned into museums, their empty halls now walked by tourists instead of titans. The family that once owned America faded into the footnotes of history. The old American proverb says, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The Vanderbilts were its most spectacular, most tragic proof. By 1973, at the first grand Vanderbilt family reunion, there was not a single millionaire left among them. How does a $200 billion empire, an empire forged in grit and fire, crumble into dust? This isn't just a story of riches to rags. This is the story of a blueprint, a precise, step-by-step guide on how to build an empire, and the hidden, fatal blueprint for how to destroy one. This is the Vanderbilt Blueprint for collapse. Our story begins not in a marble palace, but on a small, rickety ferry boat in the choppy waters of New York Harbor. It begins with a boy named Cornelius Vanderbilt. Born in 1794 to a poor, uneducated farming family on Staten Island, Cornelius was a rough, aggressive youth. He had no formal education. His spelling was atrocious, and his grammar was worse. He quit school at age 11. But he possessed something far more valuable than schooling, a burning, ruthless ambition fused with an uncanny instinct for the future of commerce. At the tender age of 16, he struck a deal with his mother. If he could plow and plant a rocky 8-acre field on his own, she would lend him $100. It was backbreaking work, but he did it. With that loan, he bought his first boat, a piragua, a shallow draft sailing vessel, and started his own passenger ferry service between Staten Island and Manhattan. The business was already crowded, full of established operators. Vanderbilt didn't care. While his competitors rested at night, he worked. While they had charged a fixed high price, he aggressively undercut them. He was known to work 24 hours straight, sleeping on his boat, always ready to take a passenger. He was loud, profane, and utterly relentless. People quickly stopped calling him Cornelius. They gave him a title, one he would carry for the rest of his life, the Commodore. He had earned it by commanding a small but fiercely competitive fleet of boats before he was even 20 years old. The Commodore's genius was his ability to see the next technological wave before anyone else and to ride it with ferocious intensity. His first big move was from sail to steam. He saw the power and reliability of the steamboat and knew it was the future. He battled his way into the lucrative Hudson River traffic, challenging the powerful government-sanctioned monopoly held by Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston. He took them on in court in the famous Gibbons versus Ogden case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, a battle he ultimately won, breaking the monopoly and opening the waterways to competition he was uniquely suited to dominate. His motto was simple and brutal. I don't care half so much about making money as I do about making my point and coming out ahead. When the gold rush ignited in California in 1849, the Commodore saw another opportunity.
The journey by land was perilous. The journey by sea around Cape Horn was long and expensive. He established a new route, by steamboat to Nicaragua, overland through the jungle, and then by another steamboat up to San Francisco. It was faster, cheaper, and made him a fortune. When rivals tried to steal his company while he was on vacation, he famously wrote them a short, terrifying letter. "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I will not sue you, for the law is too slow. I will ruin you." And he did. But his true masterstroke, the move that would cement his family as the richest in the world, came when he was nearly 70 years old. An age when most men are reflecting on their legacy. The Commodore was planning his next conquest. He saw that the future wasn't on water, but on land. It was the dawning of the age of the railroad. In a move that shocked Wall Street, he began systematically selling his entire steamboat fleet, a vast and profitable enterprise, and poured every last dollar into the chaotic, fragmented, and often corrupt world of railroads. In 1867, he demonstrated the totality of his power in the most brutal way imaginable. He had gained control of the Hudson River Railroad and the New York and Harlem Railroad, but the rival New York Central Railroad was still a powerful competitor. All these lines fed into one critical choke point, the Albany Bridge, the only rail bridge into New York City. The Commodore controlled the bridge. In the dead of a freezing winter, without warning, he closed it. Chaos erupted. No trains from the west could enter or leave the financial capital of the nation. Passengers were stranded, freight piled up. Wall Street panicked as the stock of the New York Central, now cut off from its primary market, plummeted. As his rivals watched their fortunes evaporate, the Commodore's agents were quietly, methodically buying up every share of their stock for pennies on the dollar. When the dust settled, he had complete control. It was a corporate checkmate. Through sheer cold-blooded strategy, he had consolidated a monopoly on the most valuable commercial route in America. He was no longer just a tycoon. He was a king. He commemorated his victory by building Grand Central Depot, a magnificent terminal at 42nd Street that would become the heart of his empire. He lived simply, uninterested in the trappings of high society, focused only on the accumulation of capital and the expansion of his power. When he died in 1877, Cornelius the Commodore Vanderbilt was the richest man in American history. His fortune was valued at over $100 million, more money than was held in the entire U.S. Treasury at the time. He left 95% of it to one son, William Henry Vanderbilt. His dying words to him were not of love or comfort, but a stern command: keep the money together. William Henry was, in many ways, the opposite of his father. He was quiet, dutiful, and methodical. The brash Commodore had often been ashamed of him, once dismissing him as a blatherskite, a fool incapable of running a business. For years, William was exiled to a farm on Staten Island. But William was no fool. He was a shrewd and patient businessman, a manager where his father had been a conqueror. He took the $100 million empire his father had built, and in just 8 short years he doubled it to $200 million. This was the absolute zenith of the Vanderbilt fortune, a sum equivalent to over $200 billion today.
But William, despite his business acumen, made the first critical change to the Vanderbilt Blueprint. The Commodore's entire philosophy was centered on making money. The new generation's philosophy would be to spend it. William started the trend, building a colossal mansion at 640 Fifth Avenue, filled with priceless art. But it was his children, the third generation, the grandchildren of the Commodore, who would turn spending into a competitive blood sport. Welcome to the Gilded Age, an era of such obscene wealth and extravagant display that it earned its name from a Mark Twain novel satirizing the period. It was a time when the surface glittered with gold, but the foundation was rife with social anxiety and brutal competition. The new generation of Vanderbilts weren't builders, they were aristocrats, or at least they desperately wanted to be. The problem was old money. The established, blue-blooded families of New York, led by the formidable Carolyn Astor, the Mrs. Astor, considered the Vanderbilts to be vulgar, new money. Their fortunes smelled of ferry docks and railroad grease. They may have had more money, but they had no class. They were not invited to the exclusive parties, the balls, the inner sanctum of New York society.
This is where Alva Erskine Smith, the wife of William K. Vanderbilt, a grandson of the Commodore, enters the story. Alva was as ambitious and ruthless as the Commodore himself, but her battlefield was not Wall Street. It was the ballroom. She was determined to use the family's immense wealth to blast their way into the highest echelons of society. Her weapon of choice was architecture. She commissioned a breathtaking French chateau-style mansion at 660 Fifth Avenue, which the press dubbed the Petit Chateau. It was a declaration of war. Then, in 1883, she planned her masterstroke, a housewarming party, a costume ball so lavish, so over the top that it would be impossible to ignore. The press covered the preparations for weeks. The theme was inventive, and the costumes were staggeringly expensive. Alva herself dressed as a Venetian princess. The cost of the ball was estimated at $250,000, over $7 million in today's currency, a significant portion of which was spent on champagne alone. There was just one problem. Mrs. Astor's daughter, Carrie, wanted desperately to attend and practice her quadrille dance with Alva's daughter, but Alva delivered the final, calculated blow. She regretfully informed Mrs. Astor that she couldn't possibly invite Carrie, as she, Alva, had never been formally called upon by Mrs. Astor. It was a social checkmate worthy of the Commodore himself. Defeated, Mrs. Astor dispatched her footman with her calling card, officially acknowledging the Vanderbilts. The gates of society had been breached. The Vanderbilts had arrived.
This victory triggered an architectural arms race, a Gilded Age potlatch where the Vanderbilt cousins competed to outspend one another. They lined Fifth Avenue with palaces so grand they were called Millionaire's Row. Then they moved on to Newport, Rhode Island, the summer playground of the ultra-rich. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, William Henry's eldest son, built the Breakers, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palace that cost over $7 million to build in 1895. Its bathrooms had salt and fresh water taps. The walls of one room were adorned with platinum leaf, an ostentatious choice even for the time. Alva, not to be outdone, built Marble House just down the street, a neoclassical temple of white marble that cost $11 million, with $7 million of that being spent on 500,000 cubic feet of the stone itself. And then there was George Washington Vanderbilt III, the youngest of William Henry's sons. A quiet, intellectual man, he decided to build his own personal kingdom in the mountains of North Carolina. The result was Biltmore. It wasn't a house, it was a medieval city. With 250 rooms, 43 bathrooms, 65 fireplaces, an indoor swimming pool, and a bowling alley, it remains the largest private home ever built in America. Its construction required its own private railway spur, its own brick factory, and a village for the hundreds of workers. The spending was endless. They bought yachts that were essentially private cruise ships. They built stables that were more opulent than most people's homes for their prize-winning racehorses. They bought priceless art collections, and most expensively of all, European titles. In a crowning moment of social ambition, Alva forced her daughter, Consuelo, to marry the 9th Duke of Marlborough. Consuelo was in love with another man and wept behind her veil on her wedding day. But the deal was done. The Vanderbilts provided a dowry of $2.5 million, over $75 million today, which saved the Duke's ancestral home, Blenheim Palace, from ruin. In return, the Vanderbilts got what they craved, a connection to legitimate, centuries-old aristocracy. The Commodore built an empire to produce wealth. His grandchildren built palaces to consume it. This was step one in the blueprint for collapse. Shift the family's purpose from creation to consumption. The engine of the family was no longer the business. It was the lifestyle the business afforded. The money was a mighty river, and they were busy building ever more elaborate dams of marble and gold to enjoy it, never imagining the river itself might one day run dry. The Commodore, in his will, made one fatal error in his grand plan. He left the entire fortune consolidated with one son. His son, William, in his own will, made the opposite and equally fatal error. He divided his $200 million fortune among his 8 children. This was step 2 of the blueprint for collapse. Dilute the capital.
A single consolidated fortune of $200 million is an economic force of nature. It can buy politicians, crush competitors, and shape industries. 8 fortunes of $25 million are simply the bank accounts of very rich people. Each subsequent generation further subdivided the inheritance among their own children. The great thunderous river of wealth was methodically diverted into dozens, then hundreds of smaller streams. Each stream was easier to drain, and none had the force of the original source. The centralized power of the dynasty was deliberately dismantled from within. And just as the family was perfecting the art of spending, the world outside their palace walls was changing with brutal speed. The railroad, the mighty engine of the Vanderbilt Empire, was facing its own mortality. The invention of the automobile by men like Henry Ford and the dawn of aviation were creating new paradigms for transportation. Furthermore, the political climate was shifting. The era of the robber baron was ending. Antitrust legislation like the Sherman Act began to challenge the monopolistic practices that the Commodore had perfected. The railroad industry became more regulated, less profitable, and far more competitive. The Vanderbilts were a railroad family. Their identity was tied to the rails. They failed to see the future, as the Commodore had. They failed to diversify their holdings, to invest in the new industries of the 20th century. This was step 3 in the blueprint. Failed to innovate and adapt. While new entrepreneurs were building empires in oil, steel, and automobiles, the Vanderbilts were polishing the silver in their Gilded Age palaces, trapped in the amber of their past glories.
Then came the government, delivering 2 sharp blows. In 1913, the United States ratified the 16th Amendment, introducing a federal income tax. For the first time, the massive incomes funding their lifestyles were taxed. This was followed by the estate tax, which placed a heavy levy on the transfer of wealth from one generation to the next. Suddenly, maintaining these colossal estates wasn't just expensive, it was financially ruinous. The upkeep on a house like Biltmore or the Breakers cost millions of dollars a year in staff, heating, repairs, and now crippling taxes. The Great Depression was the final, merciless nail in the coffin. The value of their remaining railroad stocks, the bedrock of their fortune, plummeted. The dividends that had flowed so reliably for decades, funding every party and palace, slowed to a trickle and then stopped altogether. The party was officially, brutally over. The collapse began slowly, then all at once. Starting in the 1920s and accelerating dramatically after World War II, the great Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue, the very symbols of their conquest of New York, were sold off and demolished. One by one, they fell to the wrecking ball. The magnificent home of Cornelius Vanderbilt II at 742-748 Fifth Avenue was sold and torn down to make way for the Bergdorf Goodman department store. The Petit Chateau of William K. and Alva, the site of their legendary ball, was destroyed. It was a humiliating public retreat. Cornelius Vanderbilt III, a fourth-generation heir struggling to pay his bills, famously lamented, "These great houses are white elephants." This was step 4 of the blueprint. Liquidate your core assets to fund a lifestyle you can no longer afford. They were selling the factory to pay for the groceries. The palaces were the first to go. Then came the art collections, the yachts, and finally the stocks themselves. The principal, the sacred source of the wealth, was now being consumed. Biltmore was turned into a full-time tourist attraction to pay its own bills. The Breakers was leased to the Preservation Society of Newport for a symbolic $1 a year because the family could no longer afford its upkeep. They couldn't even afford to live in the monuments they had built to their own greatness.
The Vanderbilt name lives on today, most famously through the respected CNN journalist Anderson Cooper, the son of Gloria Vanderbilt. Gloria herself was a living symbol of the family's decline, the subject of a sensational custody battle in the 1930s as the poor little rich girl. Cooper has spoken openly about the family's legacy of lost wealth, famously stating that his mother, Gloria, made it clear to him from a young age, there is no trust fund. The money was gone. The inheritance, he said, was not financial. It was an inheritance of ambition, of the drive to work, and of a powerful cautionary tale. So what is the Vanderbilt blueprint for collapse? It's not a mystery. It is a clear four-step process, a warning etched into the stone of their demolished palaces. Step 1. Forget how the money was made. Shift the family's core purpose from creation to consumption. The first generation builds the business. The third generation builds the ballroom. They come to see the fortune not as a tool for enterprise, but as an endless well for personal gratification and social climbing. Step 2. Divide and conquer yourself. Dilute the capital across countless heirs. Instead of a centralized, professionally managed trust designed to protect and grow the principal for future generations, the fortune is splintered. It is picked apart by individuals, ensuring that no single part is large enough to remain a dominant economic force. Step 3. Fall in love with your past and fail to innovate. The Vanderbilts were a railroad family living in an automobile world. They clung to the industry that made them rich long after its golden age had passed, blind to the seismic shifts in technology, politics, and business happening all around them. Step 4. Liquidate your assets to fund your lifestyle. When the income streams inevitably dry up, they began to sell the core assets of the empire. The mansions, the art, the foundational stocks, not to reinvest in new ventures, but simply to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. They chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of solvency, until there was nothing left to sell. The story of the Vanderbilts is a ghost story that haunts the American dream. It's a testament to the fact that no fortune, no matter how immense, is permanent. It proves that wealth is not a static possession. It is a dynamic process. It must be nurtured, guided by innovation, and protected from vanity. The moment you stop building, the moment you believe the empire is complete, you have already begun the process of collapse. That is the secret, the terrible, and the timeless lesson of the Vanderbilt Blueprint.